I am Kyle Wingfield. I'm the president and CEO of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our organization. I'll give you just a little bit of background about it, but we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank based here in Atlanta. We focus only on state issues of economic and fiscal impact. We've been around since 1991, and our mission is to improve the lives of Georgians through public policies that enhance economic freedom and opportunity. And we think that's a very, very relevant mission to the work that this committee is doing. Unlike the previous presenter, I'm not an economist, although I've played one in the newspaper for a number of years. But I have the pleasure of working with a lot of economists. And one of them y'all got to hear from earlier during this committee's work, Ray Hederman from the Buckeye Institute. We've been partnering with his team on a study of several different tax reform scenarios that could inform the work that you're doing here. As I let Chairman Blackman know this morning, unfortunately the building of that, the data set and the model and taking account the hyperinflation of the last couple of years is taking them a little bit longer than they had anticipated. So I don't have those results for you just yet. I will be happy to share them with the committee as soon as they're done in the next couple of weeks. I do apologize for that, but it's just a process that, as Dr. Parrish said, you want to get these things right and you want to be able to look at various factors. And the inflation of the last couple of years is really throwing off a lot of the assumptions that some of these models have used for a long time. So they're trying to be very diligent and take as good account of that as they can. With that said, I do want to, having been mindful of many of the presentations y'all have heard over these past several months and all the information you've gleaned, I thought I might give you something of just a little pep talk this morning as you think about the work and the direction that you're trying to take. We do believe that Georgia really has a once-in-a-lifetime or maybe even rarer opportunity before it right now. And why do I say that? Well, Georgia's prudent fiscal management presents the chance to position the state as a national leader for years, maybe even decades to come. And I want to take a moment to recognize why that opportunity exists. Every dollar collected in taxes is a dollar that Georgians can't use to save or invest, which is the lifeblood of the economy. Now, that's not to deny that tax dollars support important functions. K-12 education, higher education, public safety, infrastructure, safety net programs. But each tax dollar collected before it's spent should be weighed against its potential use by the private sector. As the French economist Bastiat observed, there is the seen and there's the unseen. We can see how a tax dollar might be spent to create or expand a government program, but we have a harder time seeing how it might be used by people that we don't know, dozens or even hundreds of miles from here. One way to gauge whether the state is doing a good job of weighing such uses is to compare the change in spending level over time to changes in population and inflation. Over the past 10 years, the rate of inflation nationally, plus the rate of population growth in Georgia, has averaged about 3.6% per year. Over that same period of time, the state budget has grown by about 5.4% per year. That means spending growth is about 1.5 times faster than people and prices are growing. Now, some of you might find that alarming, but Georgia's saving grace is that it's actually been spending less money than it's taking in. Total state treasury receipts over those same 10 years have averaged about 7% per year. All of which is to say, you and your colleagues in the General Assembly, in partnership with Governors Deal and Kemp, have struck a pretty good balance over time. In the post-pandemic period, we've seen revenues grow at a rate none of us ever imagined. Revenues grew by about $10 billion between 2010 and 2020, but also between 2020 and 2023. As everyone here is well aware, this revenue gusher, combined with the prudent fiscal management I described earlier, has led to an unprecedented level of surplus for the state, some $10.7 billion beyond the swollen rainy day fund and other reserves. How the General Assembly reacts to this situation is crucial to Georgia's future. Predictably, there's a stream of calls for using this money to create or expand government programs. And there may well be some wise uses of the surplus that involve spending. on transportation infrastructure, for example, or restructuring debt or unfunded liabilities. However, Georgia's not attracted people and companies with lavish public programs. On the contrary, it's remained a fast-growing state for almost half a century while remaining one of the lowest spending states in the nation. That's because it has also been one of the lowest taxed states in the nation. People and businesses flock to states where government doesn't crowd out their saving and investing, that is, the means by which they pursue their hopes and dreams. Entrepreneurs stay in places and grow their businesses in places where they have the latitude to do so, free from overly burdensome taxation as well as regulation. That has been one of Georgia's key competitive advantages. But our neighbors are not sitting by idly. As you're no doubt aware, states around the nation have been moving aggressively to position themselves as business-friendly through lower tax rates. As we know, Florida and Tennessee, our neighbors to the south and north, have zero personal income tax. South Carolina has slightly narrowed the gap with us, at least temporarily. But no state has been more steadily committed to lowering tax rates than North Carolina, which 10 years ago had a top rate almost 2 points higher than ours, but this year sits a full point below ours. You and your colleagues have not been sitting still either. Last year you passed an important tax reform that will flatten our personal income tax to a single rate, exempt more to income from taxation, and lower the rate to 5.49% next year, with a path over time to 4.99%. But whereas that would be competitive with North Carolina today, that state has its own downward path to 3.99 by 2027. So your work here is not yet done. Whatever your goal ends up being, and we would suggest considering accelerating those tax cuts that were included in that bill and perhaps setting a path beyond that, there are a couple of different models you could follow. We can find one in Iowa. That's a state that has a college football team that's not very good at scoring points, but it's also home to a legislature that's been putting points and wins on the board very regularly lately. You can talk to me later if you'd like to hear more about what they've done on school choice, but for now I'll stick to their tax reform efforts. For years, Iowa had a graduated personal income tax structure with a top rate of almost 9%. It also had a modest reserve known as the Taxpayer Trust Fund that allowed lawmakers to sock away up to $60 million at a time to be refunded to taxpayers. That was nice, but in 2018, Iowa's lawmakers lifted the cap and renamed this fund the Taxpayer Relief Fund. Once the state's primary rainy day funds are full, lawmakers can put money into this fund and use it for a variety of types of tax relief. The fund, once limited to $60 million, reached some $2.7 billion this year and has been projected to hit $3.4 billion in fiscal 2024. The size of this fund has given lawmakers in Iowa the confidence to do some major tax rate cutting, knowing that they have money set aside to make up the difference if revenues come in lower than expected. As a result, they've enacted reforms that will take their personal income tax to a flat rate of 3.9% in 2026, less than half the rate of just a couple years ago. There was even a proposal this year to rename the fund yet again to the Individual Income Tax Elimination Fund and set that state's personal income tax on a path to hitting zero. That's something no state that had a broad-based personal income tax has ever achieved, but Iowa may accomplish it by setting money aside to make it happen. With far more money in the bank here, that's a model Georgia could consider. The other model to consider is North Carolina's, and it's closer to the purpose of this joint committee, which is reviewing Georgia's tax credits. Put simply, North Carolina has managed to lower tax rates for all by slowly broadening the tax base. It has done this by eliminating some tax breaks, both individual and corporate, deemed economically inefficient. It's also broadened the sales tax base by taxing more consumer services, essentially reducing another type of tax break. Adding sales tax to the mix may be broader than this committee is prepared to go, but I didn't want to leave it out because it's an important part of what they've done. The result is that North Carolina is scheduled to cut its personal income tax rate nearly in half over a period of 14 years, while also eventually eliminating its corporate tax rate. What has that meant for the state? According to a 2021 article by the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation, here's what has happened since the first tax reform bill passed there in 2013. North Carolina's state GDP was up only 1.8% in real terms in the 7 years leading up to 2013, compared to a national average of 5.6% GDP growth. In the 7 years following, which includes the downturn from the coronavirus pandemic, state GDP rose 9.5%, exceeding the 9% national average for the period. And over the past decade, North Carolina has seen the third most net migration, following only Florida and Texas. In other words, they've gone from growing at about one-third the national average rate to surpassing the national average in a relatively short period of time with some sound but aggressive tax reform. Now, our foundation takes no position on which tax credits or deductions ought to be curtailed. We only wish to reinforce for you that granting tax relief to all, rather than a favored few, can have a strong economic impact. To return to Bastiat, what is seen are the jobs associated with the recipients of those tax credits and deductions. What is unseen are those that emerge elsewhere when others have their tax burdens lowered.